Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bob. Dreaming Whilst Black was one of my favourite shows of last year, so it gives me great pleasure to welcome one of the writers from the show, Ali Hughes. Ali will join us and talk about how he helped craft the show and the changes that were made from the web series to the TV series. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. So now, let's jump into the conversation with Ali. Hi Ali, thank you for joining me today.
No, thank you for having me on.
Excited to sit down and talk to you about Dreaming Whilst Black, which is streaming now on BBC Three and soon to be on Showtime in America, which must be quite you must be quite proud of that, and also sort of like being able to share that news with people. I think it's like coming out around September 8th, I think, sort of time.
I honestly don't know. I get the updates when everyone else gets the updates, but I think it's around then.
Do you have those sort of like, have you had a bit of a pinch yourself moment knowing that it's gone from being like a web series to being on BBC Three to now being in like America as well?
Do you know what? No, not really, because I'm not very good at savoring moments, which is stupid, really. So I've been consciously trying to do it because we were at the Emmys last November and Johnny couldn't go, so he'd given me a speech to read out because obviously as the white man accepting an award for a black show, I was already like I'm on eggshells here, and so when we were there, he'd give me the speech to read out, but it was in patois, and so the whole time I was just stressed. If we win, I've got to go on stage and read this speech. So I was basically probably the only person who was associated with it praying that we didn't win because I had a horrendous time. I just couldn't enjoy myself. But but then it was one of those afterwards. I was like, oh, we did get nominated for an Emmy. Like maybe it was just a delayed thing. But it's really nice, I guess. Yeah, realizing. My brother pointed out, he's like, we had Peter Serafinovich in there, and we had Izzy City and Jessica Hines, and big comedy gang. Demi, obviously, as Maurice. Like just all the people we had, he was like, you've got amazing people reading your dialogue. So that was like a real pinch me moment, I think. But yeah, trying to soak it in.
I think sometimes it's kind of difficult to notice these things until a good few weeks later or a good few months later, just because it's kind of like it's very hard to sort of to actually like comprehend what's happening sometimes, as silly as that sounds. But it's also a case of just like riding that wave until it finishes and then being like, wow, like we really smashed it and created something incredible.
Yeah, me and Johnny actually we went for lunch with some people the other day and they were like, do you want some champagne? We were like, yeah, we'll have champagne. And then afterwards we were like, let's just go for a beer. We went for a beer together and it was just really weird because it was the first time in God knows how long that we just sat there with nothing to fix. It was just like, oh, we're here. Like this is the moment that we've been waiting for. Like, and it's quite weird when you just sort of acknowledge that, and in a nice way. But it was like, yeah, we can just have a beer and enjoy this rather than like well, I mean, everyone knows this show was a production and whatever, and it was just nice to actually have that moment.
I think as well, it's like when you have that moment as well where you could just sit back and not worry about the notes that you've been given or the little touches that you need to amend. Because I can imagine as well that like that's probably can be quite overwhelming as well, knowing that you've got so much to keep doing and keep going with your program.
Yeah, 100%.
But let's start from the beginning. How did the project come about? Because originally it was a web series back in 2018 and then became a pilot that aired on BBC Three in 2021. And it was awarded a BAFTA Craft Award for Emerging Talent. But where does the story begin for you?
So me and Johnny met at film school, and then when we graduated, so he was actually a director, and I was the writer. I was on the writing course, sorry. And he wanted to create material for himself to direct. So him and three other people, three other friends who were also directors, all started a company. And the first thing that they came up with, but Johnny kind of had this idea for a web series, a semi-autobiographical thing about someone in London trying to make it in the industry, and it was basically a cheap option, and they liked the idea, and it meant they could all direct different episodes, so it kind of filled the bill. And then, but as none of them were writers, they basically brought me on to sort of just help. So I think he did the first drafts, but they were all over the place. Um, so we just sort of gave them structure, and my kind of inclination is to write comedy anyway. I see myself as a failed stand-up with still maybe some ambitions to rekindle that. And so yeah, so when I did it, I just kind of naturally brought that voice to it because it was a lot more dramatic before, which is I guess is where the sort of comedy drama comes from, and that was something that people seem to really like. When people spoke about it, they really liked the balance of it, and so we were sort of like, oh well, let's just keep doing that then. And then then I don't really know the full like how it got to the. I think someone just saw it, someone involved, which is obviously. I mean, it did do well. Johnny's very good at pushing stuff. I've definitely learned a lot of his ways in that regard, and it went all over the world and won lots of awards and stuff. So I think it just did well enough to get the attention of the right people.
When it came to sort of getting the first draft of the scripts and then developing the story, kind of playing on Ajani's experiences and then trying to sort of make it as yourselves, how did you go about structuring the stories for it? And in terms of also like story structure, there seems to be like if there's something good that happens just around the corner, something bad sort of follows along with it. Is that something that you guys wanted to establish early on as well for character arcs?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, any story needs an arc. So because before they were kind of just standalone episodes, and obviously you need a story of the week in an episode, but it was still had to have some sort of overarching. I like before they had 10 episodes, and I can remember just sort of saying that you just don't need 10. Like there's 2 episodes here that kind of do the same thing, so we can combine those. And okay, well, if we move that here, then that gives us this lines up with. So it's basically taking the ideas and just finding like the best shape for them, but whilst having that arc. Because I mean, it's I guess the TV show is kind of like a remake essentially of the web series, whereby it's still him, Quabana, struggling to get his foot in the door whilst balancing his love life. He's falling in love with a girl, and he's got his family in his ear about giving up his. It's the same kind of elements and conflicts, but just with more money, which is always helpful.
I think as well, like when you have, I guess when you're saying as well, like having so many episodes and then sort of just slimlining it more to not to repeat the sort of same pattern. It's quite interesting to hear as it just sort of, I guess it allows you to sort of hone more on what you guys want to say and what's important, especially when it's like you do have that sort of show of the week, but then also what the overall arc should be and what should be like followed from it at the same time. In terms of working on the web series and then going to the TV series, because the amount of episodes cuts down and the writing might slightly change. How much changed from the web series to the TV series?
I guess quite well. Like I said, we kept the elements, but how we went about it. So we originally we actually kind of planned to do a sort of a much closer remake of the web series of Quabana struggling, to sort of to do the self-funding stuff. And then I can't remember who, someone at the BBC or A24, one of them said like, we don't really need all this. It's kind of a repetitive thing. So they brought in the idea of the scheme and bringing that forward. And so I guess it was like a natural evolution. We tried to keep as many of the casts as similar. We still wanted to keep like the essence of what the web series was, but then it was just a bigger world, I guess. We had time to open it up and spend more time with characters. And so like the Maurice, the cousin character played by Demi, with Fumi, who was played by Rachel. I've had so many people say how much they love them on screen, and we just didn't have time for that kind of thing in the web series. So that was nice. I guess it just gave us more breathing space, really.
And then, like on top of that, because even though the series does focus on Kwabena, but you have great characters surrounding him as well. As you mentioned, his cousin Maurice, for me, also what Amy is going through. And whilst you're building up Kwabena's story template, whilst you're sort of writing that and creating that, how do you try fit in every other character's story and sort of try to make it all flow without it feeling disruptive?
Well, I guess it's just kind of it should be that organically, really, because it's obviously Kwabena's story. So it's like, well, how do these people relate to his story? Because also we didn't want to just have stories for the. It's kind of an ensemble show, as in there's lots of stories going on, but he's still obviously the main thread. So it was yeah, exactly. That was how do these characters fit into that story? With obviously Maurice and Fumi, with the baby coming, it meant that Kwabena had this looming, you've got to find somewhere else to live. And with Amy, it was that's his producer, and she's having this terrible time at work, and he's potentially under threat of losing her. And yeah, it was just. I always think that a story, the end of a story, should kind of be like a magnet, and so everything that comes before that sort of sticks to it. It's all relevant somehow, and that was just kind of how we saw. That was kind of how we approached the show as like one big story, I guess. And it's like, right, how do these things fit in so that by the end they all come together?
The thing on top of that, like even though as you said it is an ensemble cast, but it isn't. There's also like as audience members watching it, you kind of want to see the lives that affect Kwabena around him as well. And I think what's works so well in the show is how well each person's characterized and what they're going through. Even with like his auntie and cousin who's been arrested, and like Kwabena kind of using like his cousin's situation to further his career, even though he doesn't want to do it. It's not necessarily doing it for like bad intentions to further himself, but as a sort of stepping stone. And I think you really feel that in the last episode when they've had the screening and his auntie's gone because she's too upset about watching what's on screen, and then his uncle just absolutely laying into him, which is a great scene, and just everybody's reactions to it all. And you kind of have that, you feel for him, but then also you're kind of just like, well, I think Uncle has a great point here.
Yeah, that was something that I should give Ajani full credit for, because that that idea, I think, of black black people exploiting black people for their own, that was something that I was unfamiliar with. And so when he brought it up, it just gave like a whole new layer to the themes, I think, because rather than it being like a black versus, because there's obviously there's been some people criticizing the representation of white characters, and I feel like that element at the end shows the complexities of everything in regards to race, because it was exactly that. We wanted to have that moment after Claude where you went away and thought about it. I don't think we always said we never want to lecture. We don't, it's a comedy at the end of the day. It's actually quite a feel good show, I think. You don't want to watch a comedy and feel like you're being preached to in any way. So with that conversation, with that scene at the end, we just wanted it to be a moment that made you think about something, rather, or almost like you have to answer the question yourself rather than you're being told what the answer.
Performances as well, like the sadness on Quappin's face, and you kind of like when the penny drops. As an audience member, you're just like, oh shit, you shouldn't have done that. You should have gone with his original idea of Jamaica Road and really tried to push that through. Then it's not, and you kind of like, I guess it's like sometimes it's like be careful what you wish for in a way, right? You get what you want, but then it's like, what do you lose along the way?
Yeah, exactly. It's the bittersweetness, like he does technically a crabs and cheese is goal, but then it's like, but at what cost? And that was so once we had that as a once we knew we were getting to that point, everything else kind of fell into place.
In terms of like knowing that you have that end goal of getting to that sort of last scene, when it came to, even though you already had the blueprint from the web series, would you ever start from the end and work yourself backwards when it came to writing, just so that you know what the destination is, but it's like what you know what the destination is, but you kind of start planning what you want to pepper in on the journey and how to sort of show the trials and tribulations of each character.
Yeah, 100%. That's definitely the way that I write. And like I baffles me how I know Stephen King can just sit down and just like bash out 1,000 words every day, and he just sort of ends up. He's like, right, that's the end of that book, and then I know he can do that, but there's a reason he's got a lot more money than me, I guess. Um, but I can't do it. I have to know where. It's like it's like getting in the car. Like, where are we going? This way. Like, you have to know. So that's kind of how I see it. And so, and again, tying into I get into metaphor about a magnet earlier. That's how I see it. So once you know that point, you then get the through line. You go, okay, well, this is what the story's about. Okay, so then what what else can tie into this? Whether it's thematically, that's kind of where I got asked. I was on a Q&A the other day, and someone asked about the comedy, and I said, actually, to be honest, the comedy comes a bit later because it'll often be that we've got the story idea, and obviously it's very sort of well, at least semi-autobiographical, probably obviously more so on Johnny's part, but at the core, it's still about someone trying to break into the industry, which is kind of how I was in that version as well. So the once you've got those main story, you then sort of replay incidents. So, times when I was a runner on set and I would just get bollocked all the time, and then there'll be something, and that was kind of how I guess the race joke sort of started to filter in, I guess, because Johnny would be like, oh, like it's funny you've had that experience because when I have that experience, it's actually like this, and I was like, oh, okay, like, and it just sort of organically grows, I guess. But it can only really, I find it can only really grow from having something there as the foundation, which is why, yeah, I always think we need to know where we're getting to. But that was just us. That was how we approached it anyway.
It's interesting to hear though, in terms of just how each writer's approach is different and what the sort of process is going to be like just to get to where you want to get to story wise. It is amazing though to think when you have like certain writers can just knock out whatever 1,000 words like that without a problem. That's always something that's just like wow, like I wish I could do that, but I reckon there's probably so much editing that still goes into it because they're sort of just like regurgitating as much as they can and then just cutting down as well at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's so many different. I think the big thing that I've learned from writing is there's no way. Like some people really benefit from quite a rigid system. Like, oh, I get up at 6 and I write till 2, and then I whatever. Like, it took me a long time to sort of figure that out. In the end, I was just like, as long as it gets done, like that's the main thing. And again, like knowing where I'm going rather than just starting, because starting is the easiest way for me to end up stopping. Because as soon as I don't know where I'm going, I'm then like, right, I've hit a wall, and then that's when you just go and make tea or go and play PlayStation or what. That's for me is the easiest. So one thing that I learned from, I think it was Hemingway, said that he always used to stop when he knew what he was going to do next. And I find that a really helpful thing. So that means that when you sit down the next day, you have something to go straight into. It's just small things like that. But again, it's understanding that there is no how to, it's just whatever works for you.
I think as well, it's quite a good piece of advice that stopping at where you want to go next, so that, as you said, sit down the next time, you could just literally, start scuttling and writing away rather than sitting there sort of tapping your pen or whatnot, thinking like, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Where's this going to go? What's this even going to come? Where's the next idea going to come from?
Yeah, exactly.
But you were mentioning about the sort of comedy side of it, and what I really like about the show is like the balance between the comedy and also the seriousness of it and the sort of themes that are played throughout the show. There's also times where it could go from a sort of comedic element to then something being very hard hitting. So episode, I think it's 4, the one where Funmi is giving birth.
Yeah, episode
Um,
4. Yeah.
you have the whole car situation where it's quite funny, even though you're in that sort of stressful environment. And you've got Maurice eating somebody's delivery because he's getting stressed about it, even though he's not the one giving birth. But then you fast forward to them being into the hospital room, and there's complications, and Maurice kicks up a fuss about what's going on and wants to make sure that the nurse checks out Funmi and that there's a problem, and he gets thrown out, and it's kind of perceived as that sort of angry black man in that sort of moment. And then when he comes back, there's something that has been wrong, and it's kind of like you should have just listened all along, and that you should have listened to someone that they were kicking up a fuss about it, and it works out in the end. But there's a really good balance in that whole sort of segment of comedy and seriousness. Whilst you're writing, I'm guessing the seriousness is there at first, and then sort of build the comedy in. But when you're writing, when do you are there points where you think maybe we can make the scene a bit more funnier and add these like little sort of snippets in to make it a bit more light-hearted?
Yeah, well, because it's obviously it was produced through the BBC comedy department, right? So they were keen. We actually had at the end, just before production, we had a punch-up session with a couple of writers. Um, but what was interesting was we actually we put them in because it was lots of funny stuff, but then we actually ended up in the edit taking quite a lot out because we realized that for the story to work, so like Izzy's character, for example, Izzy City, who plays she runs the scheme, and obviously the scheme needs to be a big opportunity for Crubs. So we had her as we just had her a lot more comedic before, and obviously Izzy is hilarious, and so we filmed it all. But then, as when we watched it, we were like, oh, it kind of actually takes away from the opportunity that can really change Quabs's life. So we ended up cutting. I mean, she still has funny bits, obviously, but we needed to make her a bit more serious, I guess, for it to work narratively. But I think we always, you kind of want to release drama or the tension of drama with comedy. And I was just finding the moments, like I always think the karaoke scene, there's in the first episode when it's obviously everyone says how cringy that moment is. And before we had it that we just left them hanging, and it was just going to be really awkward, and he walked out. And then Gina, who was our producer for that episode, she suggested the no woman no cry line just to relieve, because she was like, it's so agonizing. And we're like, yeah, you're probably right, and I do actually really love that line. But I think ultimately it's kind of just what feels right, and you learn a lot more from having sat in the edit. It's the first time I've ever properly sat in an edit for that long and worked with a lot of different voices which I think is really important. And Johnny says the same thing. Like, we don't really believe in this auteur thing. We just kind of believe in making something as best as possible. And you're much better off doing that with, you can listen to people, you can listen to everyone and still disagree with stuff. It's fine. But I think it's much better to hear them. And it's only when you're in the edit you kind of actually get a flavor. You're like, oh no, that joke is too much for this moment, or actually we don't need it here. We need to let it sit a bit more, all that kind of stuff. But I definitely think ultimately it's the intuition that gives you the final kind of decider.
You mentioned when you're talking to line producer, somebody like Gina, who has a suggestion on lines. When you're having other people come in, and effectively this is like your baby, I can imagine you could be quite protective about it because it's something that you guys have worked on for quite a long time. When you have people come in and assist you on punching it up and tweaking scenes, how do you go about collaborating with them? Is it a case of just everybody sitting down and knocking out ideas and seeing what sticks, or is it a case of actually picking scenes that that needs a little bit of a touch up and spitballing ideas on how to make those scenes better?
Well, we try and have the scripts in the funniest and the best shape possible to give to the actors. But then we, Heather, Heather Baston, who did our casting, did an amazing job. We got so many people that we never thought we'd be able to get. And they obviously bring their kind of expertise onto it. So, like, the family, especially Quaz's family, like that scene in the hospital when they're talking about the soy milk joke was in there, but everything that goes around it about, they're trying to wipe out the black population with soy milk, and because it contains estrogen and all that kind of. And on the set, when people have ideas, you just listen to them, and if it works, like, yeah, do it. Because also you can do it on different takes. So we weren't directing, so we still had to, it was still the director's choice, but we would try and work with the directors. They would sort of call over and be like, "Oh, what about this?" And again, we always just said, like, you just want to make it as good as possible. So as long as you can if you can do that, then why not do it? You learn as well, I guess, that anything can change on the set. Someone can just park a van and clear off and block where you're located. You just have to learn to go with the flow. So I think that's important. And dropping ego. I know that some writers can be very precious about, well, you said perhaps, and it should be maybe, this kind of, and I just don't get it. I think when you're making something, you've got so many, especially when you've got, like I said, we were so lucky with the people that we worked with. Like, they made our show better. So I don't understand why people wouldn't want to do that, really.
I guess sometimes it is just the sort of fragile nature of people and how they want to go about making things and how they think they're right when if you get somebody else's suggestion, what's the worst that can happen is you cut it out, right? You don't use it. But then also at the same time, if you've got people who've been doing it for so long and they're giving suggestions or playing on sort of ideas or ad-libbing, as you said, like the whole soy milk scene, that does create. I'm sure people are laughing on set, but also like as an audience member watching that back, you're kind of laughing because you can. It's like the like just like the comment of it will make you laugh, but then also it's just like it makes you feel like you could think about your family as well, making similar comments as well, and how that makes it more feel like a lived in world and more lived in family.
Yeah, and it was nice as because Kemi, who plays Auntie Lola, she wasn't she we'd lost Lola at one point in the draft, and we brought her in, and it was exactly that. So, like, Auntie Lola wasn't supposed to be in that hospital scene, but because she was just great, we're like, well, let's bring her in, And so, yeah, again, having that adaptability and just and using the best the best stuff at your disposal, just I think that's something I would definitely impart to people. That's something that I would tell people to embrace if when they get the opportunity. Is like just if something works and you think something will make it better, then go with it. Don't just try stuff.
Yeah, exactly, and make sure that you be open to collaborate and whatnot. So on top of sort of the main cast and family that fill the screen, we also have a little bit of a treat with other characters that sort of pop up in various episodes. So you have Howard and Susie who kind of play on those sort of more hard hitting sort of topics, sort of playing not necessarily like maybe stereotypes not the right word, but they are that like they are those sort of people that don't understand what they're saying is actually quite wrong. And as we sort of get it through Amy's perspective, it's a bit like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they've been saying that. But then also on top of that, you've got people like Lewis, who pops up, who's quite a nice little comedic effect, and then also Adam from the recruitment agency that also adds a nice comedic effect, and how there's a callback from episode one in the final episode regarding him. When it comes to these sort of characters and elements, does the writing change once you have these characters cast by certain actors, or do you just allow the actors to sort of add to what's on the page?
It's kind of a bit of both, really, because once we'd had the pilot, especially, so like we knew, so Alex, who plays Adam, we knew his voice. So then when writing the scenes for the rest of the series, I find that really helpful actually, just knowing, because it's sort of knowing the character more, isn't it? So there is that, but then it also means that when they're on set, they have more, they can then add almost like another layer, you know? And same with Peter. Like Peter's got such a distinctive voice that it'd be stupid to get Peter Serafinovich and then not let Peter Serafinovich do his thing. Like, what's the point? So yeah, I guess it's a bit of both, really.
Okay, because I'm always sort of fascinated to see if like how strict the characters are to sticking to what's on the paper to then adding their own little flavor to the scene, and then what also is kind of like thought about if they ad lib or not. Just to sort of hit up onto my penultimate question, what was your favorite scene to write?
Hmm. What was my favorite scene to write? Well, Ep 4 kind of we had that really early. We just had it was a really nice thing. It happens sometimes where everything just sort of falls into place, and that didn't change a lot. So I definitely would pick out the car stuff because there's just a lot going on. You know, there's obviously the pregnancy and then them fighting and then the veganism. And I always think that the more stuff going on in the scene, I think Phoebe Waller-Bridge said well, I'm probably just stealing what she said, but that she talked about, the scene, I think it's in the first episode actually, when she goes for the meeting. So she's trying to get a loan of some sort, and she's obviously really hot and sweaty, so she takes her top off, but forgets that she's only got a bra on underneath. And so it adds in this whole like other tension to it. And it's a great scene. And so we kind of aim for that really, just to have as much going on. So that was definitely a fun scene in the car. The bros scene in Ep 3 as well, I think, when they're all drinking and watching the boxing and they're like, and okay, so that's a good example actually when he talks about like performativity, because they just went when they're on set, like they gave us so much, because obviously as they were getting more and more into it, they just were getting more confident, and they were like, it was hilarious. That was also another scene to write. I think those two off the top of my head, I definitely enjoy, I think I enjoy the comedy more, so that's probably why as well.
Why is it that you enjoy comedy more? Is that something more because you mentioned earlier that you were sort of wanting to get into the stand-up? Is it just because because comedy is quite difficult to write, and I think once you hit a joke that's quite once you write a joke that hits so perfectly, I think that's probably a better feeling than a scene where somebody cries with like one tear and it's quite emotional, because I don't think everybody can have that comedic timing and that comedic nature compared to more dramatic stuff.
I don't know. I guess there's a bit of security where you think like, even if something's bad, if it's funny, people are a bit more forgiving. So there's that security that tell myself. I don't know, but I guess I've always had more faith in like my I don't know whether it's my sense of humor or my ability to write comedy. I don't know. I guess it's just, for one, it's more fun as a headspace. I don't know. I don't know where it comes from, but that's just like I said. It's always been. I guess maybe that's probably a reflection of my insecurities. I'm sure that's what therapists would say. Some sort of deflection, or whatever. I guess I did kind of start writing to sort of, like everything, try and impress a girl. She's married now, so it didn't work. But no, I just do. I can't really give like a tangible kind of explanation. It's just always I just find them more fun, I guess.
I guess you can always see how far you can take a joke whilst writing it, and how also if it you have a joke and then how far other people can take it, especially on if they're on set, and how amped up they can get, and how much more of a laugh they can have with it. I guess it varies from sort of joke to joke as well on what is being on paper and what's being performed.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, also, so weird enough, I've in this time that I've had a bit of a break, I've gone back on an old script, and it's funny because it's probably a couple of years since I've worked on that script. So obviously I've grown as a person. Well, I say grown, could easily have gone backwards, who knows? But I've certainly changed. And it was a sad ending. It was a really bittersweet ending. I was like, you know what? There's enough shit in the world. Like I don't want to. and I changed the ending, and just as a bit more of an upbeat thing. And I do wonder if maybe no, I probably was always a cynical git when I was younger, and I think just with everything that's going on, I'm like, why would anyone want to? You want to have a nice time when you're doing these things. So I think there's probably that as well. That's a bit of a driving force behind it. Where I'm like, I don't want to sit like you don't want to sit down to something and go, oh, right, okay, let's get through this. It's like, oh, I want to watch the next one, and I think that's just come from just being older. Like I've stopped watching the news now, just because I was like, this is just so fucking depressing. And yeah, I know maybe it's like just a reflection of me. I guess I'm just a bit more optimistic now, which I never thought I'd say.
Fair enough. I think there's always, well, I think that just, as you said, you've grown as a person, not gone back. I think I should add. And I think it's interesting to hear how like things can change and how, as you said as well, you don't want to watch something where it's too dreary and be like, well, that was really hard to get through. But at the same time, what's it called? I think those are the sort of shows that will come out once a week, so it gives you a week to mentally prepare yourself to how what's the word? Getting into that sort of misery porn side of it all, shall we say? For my last question, what was your favorite scene that you wrote that translated to screen really well?
Do you know what it is? And actually, I should probably give Johnny more credit because I think he did the lion's share in the scene. But the climax when Uncle Claude, you know, tells Quaps in the basically the end of the show, because the end of the show needed to work. It needed if it didn't land, then it's kind of for nothing. And we were on that shoot. It was so hard. We were so strapped for time because we were in the cinema and we couldn't go back to reshoot. We had to get everything then, and that was done under a lot of pressure. And Roger nailed it. Literally, that's like I could have kissed him after that. I was just like, "You beautiful man." Obviously a Johnny as well. I'll give him some credit. But for that was so important, and I think for it to land as well as it did, it's the payoff essentially. That was so. I would definitely say that was certainly sticks out for me. And there are lots. And what's nice actually is there's lots of other scenes that came to life a lot more from the performances. But that scene in terms of how crucial it was, and on the day I was crippled with stress, just being like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. So for them to do that, and credit to Jermaine, who was the director at the time, with the time he had, it was so stressful. So for all of them to pull that off, that was amazing.
I think that might be one of my favorite scenes as well in the show. Just the sort of like, I think the way that it's shot, because it's very tight, you can kind of feel the anger and disappointment towards Kwabena and his decision of what he's done.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ali, thank you very much for your time today. Dreaming Whilst Black is streaming on BBC Three at the moment. Go out and watch it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really appreciate being on.
No, thank you again. You take care and bye bye.
See you later.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.